In this next chart, we're going to look at a different data methodology for seeing the yield curve. Now, you may have heard a lot about the U.S. Treasury yield curve, and I talk about that in other videos. And generally, if the shorter term interest rates are lower than the longer term interest rates, then the economy is doing well. When the shorter term interest rates are deliberately made higher than the longer term interest rates, then a recession is expected. Now, you may wonder why the Federal Reserve would raise the short term interest rates, because that's the only one that's truly in their control, because they believe that causing a recession and making millions of people lose their jobs is a small price to pay, or even a positive, to preemptively stop this inflation that wasn't going to happen anyway. But this chart over here from the Federal Reserve takes the two most important data points in a yield curve: the federal funds rate, which is effectively zero maturity for all practical purposes, and the 10-year Treasury rate, which is the benchmark for long-term interest rates on Treasuries, and something the Federal Reserve cannot control directly other than through a very indirect method of buying or selling these Treasuries. That's why I use the 10-year Treasury maturity rate as an inflation indicator when I do those inflation videos. So the delta between these two is a representation of the yield curve, the two most important data points in the yield curve. Now, the economy is generally doing well in the modern age, 1992 to present, when this is about 3%. Ideally, the Fed funds rate is 0, and the 10-year Treasury yield is about 3%. Whenever it dips too low, and certainly into negative, bad things are going to happen in the near future. And by definition, banks are going to default, because a bank's entire business model is dependent on this number being positive and substantially positive. It's not just that it's in trouble when it goes below 0, but even below 1 is starting to be at least a yellow alert, let's say. Below 0 is a red alert. And the way to think about this further is not that if it's below 0 for a very short time, like if it's below 0 for just a few days or even weeks, then nothing really happens. But what is the cumulative amount of time below 0? And what is the extent to which it's below 0? That's why we have to look at the area enclosed by this line and a floor of 0%. And whenever that has happened, we have had either a recession or a very sluggish economy for 3 or 4 years, like we had in 2000, 2002. We were about to have this in 1998, except that it was that way for a very short time. The housing bust in the United States was presaged by this, and that's why we had a very long recession. This gray area is, in fact, the duration of the recession. It doesn't account for the severity, but it definitely accounts for the duration. And remember, a recession ends only when the decline stops. Not that the economy has recovered to its all-time high or anything, but just the decline has stopped. And there was a very short recession here due to COVID-19, but they massively printed money to thwart that, which was the right thing to do. Now, unfortunately, they are raising the Fed funds rate to deliberately create an inverted yield curve, which is going to have catastrophic effects, even though they're raising it for no good reason. Inflation is not high, as I've proven many times. So now we'll go from this 30-plus year chart window to 1 year, and the link for this chart will be in the description box below, of course. This is a very fast decline. We were at 2.5% in April of 2022 and have gotten to negative minus 1.11 in under a year. In the 1 year chart, things have gotten negative to this extent. That is very steep, and this further stresses the business models of banks. So unless this gets above 0 relatively soon, which is not the direction that the Federal Reserve is even going, because they don't understand why the 10-year yield could be as low as it is, and there is also not an opportunity for the 10-year yield to rise, because then mortgage rates also rise, and we have a housing bust as well. So people correctly say that the Federal Reserve is cornered, but they're only cornered under the old-fashioned method of thinking. If they transmitted cash directly to people, as I say, while simultaneously lowering income tax to 0, then they will be able to meet the need of printing money to offset technological deflation without causing all these distortions and ridiculous misallocations. And no, transmitting money to people is not socialism because it's printed money. I'm simultaneously saying that income tax is going to be lower. So people who respond with saying that money printing shouldn't be more diffuse rather than hyper-concentrated like it is, their thinking is also many decades behind the times, sorry to say. Thanks for watching.